Welcome to the Blood Moon Archives, home to real-life encounters of things that go bump in the night. These aren't just stories. These are true horrors that will haunt you long after the screen fades to black. So lock your doors, close the curtains, and keep those lights on. Let's get into it. Boy Scout Camping Retreat by Eagle Scout. I've kind of struggled with this story for years, mostly because I just could not believe what the fuck I saw. I was never superstitious, but I'd be lying if I said I've never had any encounters with unexplainable things, and this one hits the top of the list. You don't have to believe me, folks, but good Lord, am I being honest? My account takes place in November 2010, and I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in Alpine, New Jersey, when I was in 8th grade. I stepped out of the cabin in the middle of the night to take a piss. I stood outside for a second, taking in the campsite and recalling the earlier day's activities with my classmates. The moon was so bright that it made the sky look dark blue rather than black, and there was a light fog cascading around the campsite in what seemed like light waves. It would have been a great opener for a scary movie if I had been thinking about that. I heard some rustling the bushes on the perimeter of the campsite, but I didn't think much of it at first. It continued and got louder. Slowly, I moved my flashlight along until I got to the source of the noise as it got louder and louder. I looked over and saw something that I still don't quite understand. To be honest, this thing was gigantic. Standing on hind legs, it was tall and had a muscular body with fur that looked to be black or dark gray. It had the head of a large, husky dog or wolf, only thicker. And the weirdest part was the yellow eyes. I stared at it, and it stared at me, and then it just vanished. It ran away, faster than I could even blink. I was so bewildered that I got dizzy for a minute and had to sit down. But I went back to the cabin and tried to go back to sleep. I managed to block it out of my mind for a while, but it eventually resurfaced when I watched an episode of Monster Quest about werewolves. This doesn't really bother me anymore, truthfully. The funny thing is, I feel like this thing didn't want to see me any more than I wanted to see it. It's as if we looked at each other and just silently agreed to say nothing, leave each other alone, and then act like all this shit never happened. I personally don't buy into all that transformation and bark at the moon bullshit, but I think werewolves are more of an undiscovered species. I stayed with the troop when I aged out as a scout after making Eagle status to help mentor some younger kids, and while I'll always be known as the fun leader, I still stress to the kids that the buddy system is mandatory at all times. This is because I feel strongly that my night all those years ago could have been much different if this wolf creature I had seen was a little more on the confrontational side and didn't appreciate a lone camper seeing him out at night. As a camp leader, I still go back to this campsite every year with my troop, but I have never seen this thing ever again. I always wonder, though, every time I'm out there, if it sees me even if I don't see it. I wonder if it remembers me. Dogman at the Window by Delahu. A few years ago, my dad and I were out on a hunting trip together in Minnesota, where we experienced something I'll never forget. Hudson, our dog, was sleeping in the living room when all of a sudden he started barking. I mean, barking like he was about to smash through the door and attack whatever was out there. My dad and I went out into the living room to calm him down, but he was standing at the door, hair standing up and barking like mad. My dad repeatedly tried to calm him down, but without any luck, he kept barking. Hudson started pawing at the door. All the while, he continued to bark. I looked out the window, expecting to see a wolf or bear wandering around, but I couldn't see anything at all. The motion sensor out on the front porch of the cabin used to deter the raccoons in the middle of the night from busting into things, wasn't even tripped. Eventually, Hudson calmed down, but he was still restless throughout the rest of the night. I could hear Hudson pacing around the cabin. It was almost as if he were standing guard over the whole place. We went out the next morning for our first day of hunting, but there wasn't anything worth firing a shot at. The forest seemed oddly quiet. That evening, we went out on the porch for a cigarette, and my dad pointed out that the night was unusually quiet. I agreed and stated that the same went for the day as well. Something off was going on around these woods. Hudson started barking again, even more ferocious than the last night. We went back into the cabin and tried to hush him, but he wouldn't listen. I peered out of the window, and again I found nothing. Except for this time, the motion sensor was on. It wasn't on 2 minutes before that when we were out there. I began to make out movement just outside the boundary of the light and strained my eyes to see past that point. It felt like my eyes were playing tricks on me. After a bit of convincing, I finally got my dad to look outside, and his entire demeanor changed. He wasn't so laid back anymore. He was stiffened and agitated. "That's not a bear, son," he said to me. "Then what the hell is it?" I asked. I went over to the gun rack and grabbed my Weatherby Vanguard rifle. My dad was instantly in front of me. "You shoot at that thing and we're going to have one hell of a problem. Just let it do its thing and wander off like it did last night." I went to the window again and looked outside. The motion sensors were off, but I could just make out movement. It was still there. Hudson quieted down and started pacing around the cabin. I told my dad I think it left, and he looked like he was relieved. He went to the kitchen, grabbed 2 glasses, and poured us both a serving of Jack Daniels, his favorite whiskey. He said he caught a glimpse of it, and it looked like a wolf, but it was too big and bulky. Eventually, our adrenaline went down, and we dozed off. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I woke up to another round of Hudson's incessant barking. He was pawing at my door and barking. I glanced at the window to the right of the bed and damn near fell out of the bed. Whatever Hudson was barking at was peering into the window. It was no wolf. This thing was gigantic, and it stared right back at me. It was furry and black, had yellow eyes that looked like they were glowing, ears that were triangular, and sitting on top of its head, long canine teeth and a long wolf-like muzzle. It looked to me like it was hunched over or crouching down so it could look in the window. Then it licked the screen on the window. I leapt out of bed and bolted out of the room. My dad was already awake, and I started yelling at him that the thing was back outside. I grabbed my rifle, not caring about my dad's warning, but it was gone. My dad was right behind me and told me not to shoot, that it would just piss it off. He told me that he thought it was a werewolf. I saw it with my own eyes. It really did look like a werewolf, just like from the underworld movies. He told me that when he saw it, it was standing on 2 legs, and it must have been at least 8 feet tall. I moved out of the bedroom into the living room and looked out of the window. The sensor was tripped, but I couldn't see the thing anywhere. Eventually, Hudson calmed down again and was quiet. I continued to stare out of the window, watching for any signs of the creature's return. For the rest of the night, neither of us slept. We just waited. Every time Hudson got up, my body twitched, waiting for him to start barking again, but he never did. The sun rose and we walked around the cabin, but found nothing. We trekked out into the woods, but didn't go too far into them. There were no signs that a werewolf monster had been there the night before. I thought to myself, maybe Hudson could pick up the trail, and when I said it out loud to my dad, I heard how foolish it sounded in the light of the day. It dawned on me that I didn't actually want to find proof that this thing was out there, and I definitely didn't want to find the thing itself. My dad said we should probably just go back to the cabin and pack up. I didn't have a problem with that. We never rented that cabin again. Stalked by a Werewolf by Bury Burdens. I'll start off by saying no. This isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends, through the years, to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000 in Lane County, Oregon. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog-wolf story. I've since asked each friend, over years and miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. My boyfriend, Trevor, who was dating another friend named Mackenzie at this time, were about 18 years old when this story happened. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike to wherever and puff. Ah, good old days, when we got away from parents and planned the day around smoking weed. It was Trevor and his best friend Brad, and their girlfriends, Sam and Mackenzie. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful, wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they were on. The main trail connects the parking lot to the river. They had driven in Brad's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river, from the lot, there was a very small bridge that crosses a small creek, which is relevant for later. The four of them spent the day out there, swimming and puffing and swimming, just being typical Oregonian teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours, as the sun began to set. Either activity of swimming or puffing alone is bound to get someone a little snacky, let alone at the same time. They walked along the well-used main dirt path to get back to the parking lot. It doesn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached this small footbridge near the parking lot, Brad looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain, and noticed a huge dog near the tree line, about 100 yards away. They all described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog. It was starting to get dark, but the dog that they saw was very obviously shaggy and furry. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than when they had seen it just a couple of seconds earlier. It had crossed most of the large field in the seconds it took them to get across this 10-foot-long bridge. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthy. My four friends ran to the car and had the classic cliché moment of not being able to get the key in the door because Brad was fumbling and dropping them because of panic. At this point, the dog was standing on its legs at the very edge of the parking lot, just looking at them. It still had the dog face, still had the dog body, but now it was simply standing up. They never saw it walking on all fours or even just twos, but it seemed like every time they looked up from the car, it was just standing there, closer each time. As Trevor had said, every time they looked up, that thing was closer, but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs. I don't know if it ran for a few feet and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they describe it. Many times, I asked them if they were sure it wasn't a bear, but they were confident it was a dog standing on hind legs. A big dog that was stalking them. They got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisgah dog to his own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, Sam doesn't like to talk about the incident at all, because it's too creepy for her to recall. Trevor and I have long since broken up, but this story is with me forever. Pretty sure I saw a werewolf by E. Wan. So, I never believed in the supernatural until I was like 18 in 2010 when me and my friends played with a Ouija board for the first time. The Ouija board is a whole story on its own, for another time. Anyways, after the ensuing craziness from this escapade, I'm a full-on believer of all things supernatural and unknown. I live in a very rural part of Mississippi. When I say small, I mean small. I believe my town has something like 247 people in it. Everyone knows everybody, and all of your business too. Weird things have happened before in my town, like animals being slaughtered or going missing, that sort of thing. But naturally, we always chalked it up to coyotes or other animals having a meal. I'm an avid hunter, so I was heading out to the woods with my bow, a fully decked out Matthews Creed. I got out a little earlier than usual, so it was still pretty dark out. I've never minded the woods and find it pretty relaxing to be out there by myself. So all I planned on doing was relaxing in my stand for a while, as I didn't feel like stalking today. It wasn't too far away from daylight, so the birds and other wildlife are starting to make their morning calls. Usually pretty peaceful, right? I swear to God, in the span of a second, everything in that patch of woods shut up at the same exact time. Dead silence. It didn't even try to be subtle. That alone scared the piss out of me. So naturally my scared self froze and just listened for anything that sounded out of place in the silence. My first thought was, oh shit, something's out here with me, which freaked me out even more. Then I started to think maybe it was just a bear or a bobcat, which I still was terrified to meet up. But at least it gave me a logical answer. I figured I could hear a bear coming, as they aren't known for their quiet and graceful entrances. But I knew big cats were renowned for stalking people without their knowledge, which made me nervous. It's an odd and eerie feeling to try to keep watch on all sides, alone. I decided to keep moving towards my stand, post up, and just point my bow down the tree. After what seemed like forever, I made it up. I shuffled up the stand, pulled out my knife just in case, and just listened. Dawn began to break, which made me feel better. I'm not sure why, but there is always this false sense of security with the daylight hours. Almost like nothing bad ever happens when the sun is up. Which we all know is horseshit. I sat there in my stands, still no sounds of wildlife. The woods were silent, and things were getting more and more creepy feeling. Now, it might be important to note that my stand was perched on the side of a creek. The creek wasn't very deep, like maybe to the top of your ankle. But the creek was moving so, about the only sound I could hear was the slight noise of the running water. Then I hear something to my right, and it was running fast. I instantly raised my bow and waited, shitting my pants a little in a mix of anticipation and dread. It was getting louder and louder, closer as well. It didn't sound like anything I had ever heard in the forest before. I almost screamed out loud when I saw the bastard. It literally looked like something out of Dog Soldiers, only more muscular. That thing busted through the brush, ran down the slope and through the creek, and then disappeared on the other side. I've seen some stuff out there, let me tell you. But I was shaking like a newborn baby. I didn't ease off my drawstring for like 10 minutes, which is a long time to hold a bow for those who don't know. I'm not exaggerating at all when I talk about the size of that thing. I mean, that thing was huge. It had to be around 6 feet to 7 feet tall and around 250 pounds of sheer no. And for those who think it was just a bear, I have seen bears and the likes before, and they do not run like that. Anyways, after that, the sun started to become much more prominent in the sky, and the birds began to chirp again. I calmed myself down for a few minutes and noped myself out of there in a hurry. While I was terrified at the time, it is definitely one of my coolest memories to look back on at this point. I still hunt. I just don't hunt in that location anymore, and I always bring a friend now. Evidence that changed my mind about the possible existence of werewolves by Storming Bunny Rhino. I was about 12 years old when this took place. My family moved into a 13-story apartment building. We lived on the 4th floor overlooking normal suburban housing. From my room, I could see my friend's house not so far off, and to the left of our building and the right of my friend's house was a rather huge field of knee-height grass that went over a hill. The building we lived in was at the peak of the hill. Hopefully you get the idea of the area from my description. So, my friend, we will call him Jay, a few months after we initially met, he told me about this thing that he has seen and heard in the field from his house. This was usually late at night or in the early mornings at about 3 or 4, when he was prepping to go fishing for the day. He told me that a few years prior to me moving there, one of the neighbors actually went out with his shotgun one evening and shot in the general direction of this thing. He described it to me as just seeing the red eyes and a tall, dark mass, but in the shape of a werewolf standing on 2 feet. A notable point is that this field was not illuminated as the rest of town, and only partial when there was a full moon, even from my vantage point in my room. And no, he did not see it on a full moon night. I took what he told me with a grain of salt, and I knew for certain that he had the normal teenage mentality of fancying the idea of spooks and scary tales. One evening, though, I was in my room, struggling to fall asleep with the lights off and all. Then I heard a rather odd growl, howl, or whatever, from the direction of the field. So naturally, I peeked out my window, and my imagination kicked in. I thought I saw something red moving around, but as a blur. The distance from my window to the crest of the hill was about 300 meters. But I just brushed it off as silly mind tricks. A few months went by, and I was about to join Jay on a fishing trip. We woke up at 3 in the morning and had to start packing and loading all the equipment into the truck. Now, from his house, there was 2 more houses to the right, and then the field started. The street of his house was adjacent to the grounds to the building I stayed in. So, I could see my room window while in his yard. We started hearing noises coming from field and proceeded to investigate without leaving his yard. From his house, we could see about 200 meters away into the field, and there were 2 red specks staying really still. The thing is, when we looked at it, it seemed to blur or fade, meaning you had to look away and quickly back again to see it. Those specks, or eyes as we deemed them, were about the 2 meters above the ground, if not more. It was honestly hard to tell, as at that distance, one's judgment could be a bit off. Next moment, we see the eyes darting away. We could barely make out the body features of whatever's eyes it was, just a tall black mass moving at an alarming pace back behind the hill. We chatted about it, and then just left it at that, thinking we both just imagined the thing. We went fishing that day, without a hassle or without even talking more about what we might or might not have seen. So, here comes the kicker. The following day, my brother, my friend Jay, and I went exploring in that massive field. It was at a dry spell, so all the grass was brown, and we had no rain for a few weeks. This may be noteworthy or it may not. But about a year before this happened, we found old arrowheads in that field once about a year prior to this. Obviously, we didn't think much of it at the time. As we were walking along, we neared the crested area of the hill or field, and I stumbled upon a footprint in the sand. Mind you, this was at a small clearing between the grass that was just sand. This footprint at first looked to be of some kind of animal, but cat-like. So my first reaction was, hey guys, look, some lion or leopard got free from the zoo or something. Then on closer inspection, that all changed. The main cushion was the size of a grown man's palm, with 3 smaller cushions for the toes, and the above them, 3 triangle indentations that would be for claws. The footprint did not look like whatever this was had been moving too fast. Just a quick walk, maybe. Now this was the first footprint, big with 3 toes and clearly clawed. The freaky part came when we found 2 more that went in the direction of the tracks, was towards the building I lived in. But the weird thing was, they were at least 3 to 4 meters apart, and there was no prints before or after the ones we found. This was at around 11 in the morning, and of the 3 of us, my brother was the most skeptical. He just went silent. I mean that he did not react or say anything when he saw these prints in the sand, more of a in-shock reaction or something to that nature. His reaction still gives me uneasy vibes thinking about till this day. To be honest, I think my brother's silence freaked me out, more than the actual footprints of whatever that thing was. Now, we had no cell phones at that time, as these were the days that kids weren't running around with $1,000 devices jammed into their pockets. Cell phones existed, but usually for adults who actually needed them. For work and stuff. But even if I had one to take a picture with, cell phones did not have cameras at that time. We went on exploring some more after we saw the massive prints with teenage ignorance to the potential danger we may have been in. Thinking back, what really gets me now is that we were so aloof about all of it, at the time, that we never really talked about what we saw and found that day. It's as if the pure nature of it was too much for our minds to grasp, and I eventually thought it might have been some ostrich footprint. But still their feet don't look like that, and nor was there any damn ostriches living in that area. It's funny the lengths that your brain will go to rationalize and make sense something that you can't digest as real. I've seen a lot of other animal footprints over the years since then, especially big cats and dogs, but none had that distinct shape or 3 toes thing going on. Not to mention the sheer size of what I saw all those years back. We never really talked about it afterwards, and it's been years since I asked my brother about it. The last time I asked him, a few years back, he got really uncomfortable and almost tried to dismiss it as it never having happened. So I refrained from asking him details or pestering him about it, and I have not been in contact with Jay for years now. Well, you've heard the truth. But remember, not every story ends when the video does. Some stories follow you home, into the dark corners of your mind. If you've made it this far, you might just be brave enough to face what's next. If you want to hear more of these terrifying tales, and perhaps awaken something, you shouldn't. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You'll want to know when the next nightmare arrives. But be careful. Once you step into the darkness, it's not always easy to find your way out.